I'm Gina Beavers.
And I'm Timothy Hull. And
Welcome
welcome to
to Unstretched.
Unstretched. Here we are again. Okay, we're unstretched. We're like a canvas that's been unfurled, ready to go.
Ready to go. So unstretched. I texted you, can I wear my robe to this taping? Would that be too unstretched? Um, but I had a late night and I'm just kind of putting the pieces together. Did not sleep a lot. I have a little bit of the mascara from last
From
night.
crying
Oh,
so much,
my
from dancing so hard.
yeah. So,
I'm
yeah,
doing a
but I'm
chapel
here.
impression.
Yeah. Oh, there was definitely, it was a 50th birthday party. So the tunes were all very like 90s hip hop and, yeah, like few
Oh, I
people know.
hope they played some TLC.
Oh, yeah, we had all different, like, yeah, that few people know that Haynes' alternate career was going to be a DJ. And I feel like she really showed that last night. Yeah, with her playlist. And
That makes
so,
sense. So many artists were like, moonlight as DJs. I mean, like I told you, I used to do that Britpop dance party that was like,
yes.
hate it. Like
Oh my God, I'm so sad I missed that. Like, how
art and
did
music, it's like Brian Alfred's podcast, Sound and Vision. It's like,
Yes, totally,
he
totally.
always asks people about like what music they're listening to in the studio, which I always like that. I always like that
Yeah.
question. Like, what kind of music are you listening to in the studio? Because that's what so often helps sort of give you creative momentum and like the juice to sort of, do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I listen to podcasts and true crime and audiobooks in the studio. So I don't know what that says about my
Really,
creative.
do you not listen to any music really in the studio?
Not if unless I'm like packing a work or doing something that's like requires energy or like I need to get jazzed or something. But yeah, is that weird? I guess that's kind of
I don't know if it's weird, but
yeah.
it definitely talks about the way the mind works because if I'm like being creative, if I like in a phase where I'm like making marks that need creative energy, like from sort of somewhere deep inside of me, I can listen to music in
Mhm.
this because I'm just like my brain isn't working in that linear way. But if I'm sort of executing something that's like a mindless task in some capacity, then I can listen to a podcast because then my mind can like pay attention to what's being said. So it
Yeah.
really depends upon what my creative process is at the moment, whether I can like listen to music where I'm caught in a zone or where I can listen to a podcast where I can listen to it. Because I can't listen and follow and then like kind of be creative at the same time.
No, and actually now that you said that, when I'm putting my collages together, which is the really like actively creative, I have sort of ambient music, something like turned a
Yeah.
little bit low. It's not too active, but like I do listen to music during my creative process. And then it's like the actual execution of the work where
Yeah,
I
it's a
get it.
right brain, left brain kind of thing. Like the right
Yeah,
brain is very like music and space oriented, and the left brain's
right.
intellectual and Cartesian sort of oriented. So they fulfill different
Yeah.
processes.
I do feel like I need the thing to concentrate though, other than the painting of the thing in order to get me outside of so that I can like sort of flow like unconsciously, unself-consciously when I'm painting is like I need my brain otherwise occupied, if that makes sense. I always think about oh my God, this is how tired I am. Huge British artist used to drink champers while he painted.
Damien Hirst.
No, earlier generation.
Oh,
Most massive.
Francis Bacon.
Yes. Gina's had no sleep. Francis Bacon would like get wasted when he painted, right? To escape to get outside himself. And I feel like that's a little bit what I'm doing when I'm listening to like books or whatever. I have to escape myself. So
Yeah. Do you remember that whole like drunk versus stoned phenomenon in the art world? There were like exhibitions
yeah.
of like, drunk versus stoned. And I never resonated with either of those because I
No.
can't be creative and work if I'm drunk or stoned. I
Yeah,
cannot do
yeah,
it.
yeah. No, totally. No,
I used to think my work was kind of stoner because it has a lot of repetitive mark making and it's very like focused. But no, if I like do any kind of drug like that, I can't do any artwork. It doesn't open up creative energies in me.
no, totally. I mean, and I think that some of that was just like a sort of, it was like a metaphor, like a, I'm like confused. Yeah. For like the actual, like which camp would you fall into artistically rather
Right.
than purely literal? But like, yeah, I totally agree. Like I can't, the idea of getting really drunk and doing anything is, yeah,
But it makes sense when you think about like Francis Bacon's work though. It's like I don't know if I could make Francis Bacon's work without being totally trash though.
being
Like
like,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and
yeah.
I've always had that comment. Well, in grad school, I used to get like because I was using a lot of like day glow and stuff like that. People are like, "What hallucinogens are you on?" And it's like, no, actually, just so not. Yeah, yeah, not. Although I was a drinker. I mean, I've chilled out a lot. So I did have like a party. You could sort of infer something from partying and drinking and kind of like disco, but.
Yeah, I could see that in sort of the imagery of your work in a way,
Yeah,
but not
yeah,
in necessarily the way it's painted. The way it's done
yeah,
is
yeah,
very
yeah.
like focused and
No, no.
conservative and serious.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Like, that's a very sober person making Gina Beaver's painting.
yeah, yeah. Just as
It's a drunk
totally,
person who's thought of them, but it's a sober person who's made
yes, it's executing, which is actually what I say to students is that you need to have a completely like free part of your process, which is completely open and then you have to have a really rigorous part of your process. And you can put one at the beginning, one at the end. But you have to have both elements, I feel like, to have a
Yeah,
really
well, that's very, very Nietzsche, which is like the Apollonian and the Dionysian, and sort of synthesizing the two to make good art. So
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I don't know. And the discipline could be that your brush strokes are completely wild, but like you're consistent with them. That's the discipline. Or like whatever, it's like something, I don't know. Um,
for years, I had a sort of secret side practice of Sumi ink, where I would do a lot of work in like black, indie ink, Sumi ink, that was very loose, very free, very gestural, because that would sort of keep me loose and keep me free. And also, when you make those marks, you can't erase them. Like you have to sort of be very zen about the marks you make in Sumi ink, and so like that to me was sort of like the looseness of sort of giving myself a little bit of looseness because my artwork is usually so sort of like controlled and focused.
I love that. Yeah. I was thinking too randomly about Chris Burden and reading this book like when I was an undergrad about how his numbered pieces where he would just write numbers like on pages or me. Yeah, I think it was numbers. And then ideas would come to him in that process of just like, I guess that's different because that's like repetitiveness. That's almost like meditation,
Yeah.
like meditating. And then he would get ideas through this other artwork and he would sort of go back and forth between the two, between, inventing things and then this meditative, like, but I love that. I love the Sumi. Do you ever show the Sumi ink?
I've never
Yeah.
exhibited them, but it's a big part of my teaching
Yeah.
pedagogy. I have like it's a little extravagant, but I have my students buy like a ink making kit where they have to grind their own ink in like a little stone, and they have to, they use like Japanese calligraphy brushes, and it's like a very huge part of the way that I teach. But I personally have never shown them, but I also, the big project is like looking at Van Gogh's ink drawings and then trying to sort of copy them and get at the spirit of those. And that's very like a freeing mark making experience.
That's so cool. I want to take your class.
I mean, speaking of Van Gogh, I was
Oh
just in
yeah.
Amsterdam.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And I have to admit, I was very resistant to the Van Gogh Museum sort of at the get go. Like when when we got tickets for it, it was not like a highlight in my mind. because I just felt like it was going to be sort of like the Van Gogh experience, like Disney World of art or something. And so I was like, okay, I'll go, but I'm not excited. But you, Gina, had said be prepared to love it. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm open. And I really did. Like, I actually must say now, I tell people, I'm like, if you go to Amsterdam, go to the Van Gogh Museum. It's actually pretty good. um, and it gave me a whole new insight into his process and where he was coming from and who he was inspired by, and sort of the struggle and then the marketing of like how he became Van Gogh after his death because of his brother's wife, who like sort of was like a genius marketer and relentless promoter. So there's a whole story to it that opens up the world of Van Gogh a little bit more, and then also to see people just loving it and resonating with it, and it's so full of pathos and pain, but also joy and the breadth of human experience, that it's great to watch people also interact with Van Gogh's work at the museum. So it kind of opened up a whole new world. But then I think I told you, and I even posted about it on my own personal Instagram, about how I was sort of, though, a little taken aback, but also laughed at the insane merchandising in the museum of like, just put Van Gogh on fucking anything, water bottles, backpacks,
Yeah. Yeah.
phone cases, jewelry, pillows, lamps. It's just like anything you can put an image on, they
Yeah.
have put Van Gogh's stuff on. And
I
part
wonder
of me,
yeah. Oh, sorry.
well, part of me wants to be like Jesus in the temple and just like push over every table and be like, this is wrong. But then another part of me is like, no, this is reality. Like, this
Inevitable.
is inevitable. Like, this is
Yeah.
the
Do
world we live in, kind of
you
thing.
think he's the number, like, I would love to see a list of the top merch, like who brings in the biggest numbers art wise, like
Well,
what
every semester, at the
like
beginning of the semester, I ask my students to name me like the top 5 most famous artists
yeah.
according to, and Van Gogh is always on that list.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah,
He's still like, he
yeah,
still
yeah.
has this like cultural
Yeah.
public resonance.
Totally. And you think MoMA with Starry Night, I mean, that must be like, yeah, the center of so much tourism and, just having that.
Why did you open that Pandora's box? Because that is a cudgel of mine, because, and I've posted to Instagram about this many times,
Yeah.
is that they recently put Starry Night next to Rousseau's Sleeping Gypsy.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
Everyone looks at Starry Night and
Mhm.
everyone ignores the Sleeping Gypsy.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that the Sleeping Gypsy is like a way better painting, 10,000
Mhm.
times, 10,000 times.
Yeah.
And I like have, it just drives me crazy how people are so like sheep mentality, that they just see Starry Night and they all go to it, yet the far superior, weirder, more beautiful painting is right next to it, and no one's looking at it and no one's photographing it. And I want to stand there and
Yeah.
yell at people.
So
I could do a whole podcast just on this.
about Starry Night. Well, I made a couple, like one thing I remember about the Van Gogh Museum was like that they actually have fan art in the like lobby. Do they still do that where
I
they have this?
didn't know. I did not see that. I looked
Well,
for
so
that.
they have like or they had screens where they would just like globally, like people are like making this fan art and maybe sending it to the museum, or the museum is finding it or whatever. Yeah, and they put it up there on these screens, and, like, I've made several works referencing Van Gogh, or, like, Starry Night and Bacon, which was, like, a meme, just to play on that idea of the fame and the fan, but then at the same time, like, deep in my core, I remember seeing Van Gogh paintings, like, as a teenager and, like, loving them, and I don't know, do I doubt myself as being one of the, like, the millions of fans that just is like a herd mentality, or was that something special, or does it matter, or like there is
No,
something
Van
there?
Gogh is very special, and
Yeah,
Starry Night is
yeah,
very
yeah.
special. But
Yeah.
Rousseau's Sleeping Gypsy is on another fucking
Yes.
plane.
No, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, this idea of doubting your because the fame can become so much. "Oh, I love your water bottle." I have the basic bitch one. Um, but,
The gay weirdo one.
but yeah, it's like the fame of it all and the distraction of it all can, like, take you away from, like, when you actually go and stand in front of some of those paintings like you did in Amsterdam, you're like, "Oh, no, no, this is some real shit," like, this is there's a reason that's at the beginning of all of this, but it's sometimes hard to see, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I had my aunt gave me like a sketchbook when I was like in ninth grade that had a Van Gogh's like Paris cafe scene on the front of it,
Yeah.
and I was so obsessed with that painting. I did so many copies of it. I wanted to live in Paris, and and it was so resonant on so many levels for me sort of creatively that yes, Van Gogh and I teach Van Gogh is like the core of my teaching. Like I really do feel like actually like in my drawing classes more than painting I don't really teach him, but in drawing classes Van Gogh's like ink drawings are like the sort of core basis of how I kind of want students to draw. I'm like, why do we love Van Gogh? Because he makes expressive mark making. Like he puts energy, emotion, feeling, vibrancy into line, into mark making, and that's
Mhm.
what makes him so celebrated. Really, it's not like his imagery is so freaking fantastic. It's like the pulse of the mark making. And so I always tell my students that's the key. You want to make a drawing that's really expressive and good, like focus on your mark making. So
Mm.
I spend a
Yeah,
lot of time on mark making.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. But in general, like Amsterdam was cool. Like we did like, the Reich Museum, which was fine. Like, I can't say it's my favorite museum I've ever been to, but I liked a lot of the masterpieces in there. The Stedelijk was also fine. Like, it's like one of those weird, like mid modern type museums that has weird art that you've like never seen or heard of. And you're like, how did that get there? And some rooms are dark and maybe a little dirty, which is kind of cool, but also like, can't they, light it a little better? Stedelijk was not really my favorite. I like the H Art Museum, which is like the former Hermitage,
Mm.
which has
Oh, it's so
rebranded
cool.
itself to be like anti-Russia or something. And they had a Jan Dibbit show, which blew my mind. And the space there is really open and big. It's sort of like Hamburger Bahnhof style of like this big room with, impressive artwork and no one was there. Like no one goes to that museum. But the Jan Dibbit show was very like enlightening and intellectually stimulating. Saw a lot of photography. We went to the Foam Museum. That had some interesting stuff. We went
What is
to
the foam museum?
it's like a photo, like a contemporary
Okay. I was like, foam.
museum. Yeah, I knew about it because Paul Sapuya had a show there a number of years ago. So it's sort of like on my radar. And they had his book, and I took a photo and sent it to him.
That's so cool.
Um, and then we went to another photo museum called Huy Marseille, I think it was called, and that's like in an old townhouse. We went to Grimm's, Amsterdam space. So we did a lot. We basically just did art, but one of the highlights was the Rembrandt House Museum. Which did you go to that? I
Yes.
don't. You did
That was like highlight for me too. I mean, that's amazing.
because I love being in like his
Mhm.
space, even though it's sort of recreated or whatnot. Um, and I also bought the book of his self portraits, which that was my like plane reading on the way home. As I spent like the entire plane just like 8 hours just poring over Rembrandt's self portraits, which I think is one of the most interesting self portrait projects in all of art history. And it's totally like I always knew about it and I always was intrigued by it, but when I saw the
Yeah.
whole breadth from buying this book, my mind like got like sort of blown out into a new space.
So cool. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of Rembrandt's home and studio, that's like a whole building, right? It's
Yeah.
like, what do we think? What was the deal with Dutch real estate back then? Because, and just
Well,
like,
let's talk
I
about
was
that
thinking
because
so much
actually
about that.
Rembrandt his most famous sort of celebrated self-portrait is the one that's at the Frick that he
Mm-hmm.
painted when he was like 63 or something. And he looks like a big king. He's like sitting on a throne, holding a scepter with a big hat and a gold gown. And he looks like he's sort of at the most powerful of his like wealth and power. But ironically, that was the year that he went like totally bankrupt and had to sell his entire house and all of its contents at a great loss, because the art market
Mm-hmm.
went belly up, and he had speculated in collecting art, and he also had, leveraged his own art and the value of it against debts. And because of a war between England and the Netherlands, the art market sort of collapsed, and all his debts came due, and he couldn't pay them, and so he had to go bankrupt. And I'm like, that is like that's the oldest story in the book, and we think that that's like this new thing, like Josh Kline writes this article about in October about like real estate fucking over artists and blah blah blah. But that's also been the sort of that's one of those like history is like a cycle kind of thing, like that's not a new phenomena of like artists like being over leveraged, or art markets being over leveraged, or values being overinflated, and then you can't afford this, you can't afford that, and then it all collapses and it all gets rebuilt. I mean, everything that Josh Klein is saying is totally right, but I don't think that it's like a new phenomena, certainly looking at Rembrandt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting and true. His broader, I mean, because his thesis is also American art specifically. When you think about the history of American art, that's not even that long. I mean, what are we talking about?
No, but also America went through an art gilded age, which was the 20th century, where there was so much money thrown at big art, big pieces, big economy. That's the same with the Dutch gilded age with art, like big artwork,
But
big
do you
money.
mean the Gilded Age, like are robber barons owning Impressionist paintings, or do you mean the 50s? Like,
I mean,
because
like
our art
post
world,
war.
right? But our art world, that those artists were partially funded by the WPA when they were starting out. Like they had like income in a very inexpensive city. Like it's not, like that's not. I don't know. I just think like the idea of real estate. The more I think about it, and you know that it rules our lives. Like we sit around and talk about like price per square foot, like constantly, like.
Of course.
Right. I mean, I left, I had the studio in the building in Greenpoint, and then I needed more space. And I was looking at spaces. This is 2018 in Brooklyn, and it was $5 a square foot. Like I couldn't find something 1,000 square feet that wasn't going to absolutely kill me. And I think Josh Klein's point is that he's talking about sculpture and installation and people who need more space, which I fall into because my work is like 3 dimensional. And you really, when you start to see it in terms of square footage and the size and the heft of your work, then you're like, yeah, because the last 20 years have been painting. If you look at the auction results and what people were doing in the contemporary art market, like the early part of this century, there was a lot more contemporary sculpture, contemporary, like things that took up space. And then within the last like 20 years, it's all painting. And I think what he's trying to say is that is in danger. Like that segment, painting may not be in danger. And this is technically a painting podcast, and I'm sort of a painter.
Yeah.
Sculpture and anything, I think that's really the underpinning of his thesis. And I really feel like if you look at what has sold and where the big values predominantly are, it's in the realm of painting smaller, like it's, I don't know. And then all of the pressures, I also appreciated how he talked about galleries and the pressures on galleries to like upsize. And why? It's like, again, we're talking about square footage. It's like you need to grow physically bigger in order to hold on to your artists as they get bigger. But then that puts all this real estate pressure on, the galleries. Like I was just talking to a director of a gallery, and she was just talking about overhead for galleries and how insane it's gotten. And then that affects what they pressure artists to make or what they show, like it's all like a big cycle. So yeah, I don't know. I really resonate. I also think that the artists that are doing the best, I mean, some of the artists, the biggest names, they all own buildings in the city, or like they're in the real estate market. I mean, they're becoming little real estate tycoons themselves.
Yeah, that's
100%. I would say if you're a collector that wants to bet on, go find out which artists own New York real estate and bet on them, because like they're going to, like, it's setting you up for like a certain level of security, right? A certain level of, but then I just think that's funny because then we're back to real estate. It's like this, just like, I don't know. I think it's really compelling. And and it was weird that, having lived in the city for 25 years and talked about real estate constantly and tried to like figure out where I was going to move my studio or move my apartment so that I can maximize how little I was spending, that I needed to read an article by Josh Kline to like get it in the forefront. It's like this background, and we all just accept it and like try to do our best because there's nothing we can do about it. But it's like, it's definitely there. And I think his point is just that it's affecting the art that gets made, and it's limiting the kind of art that can get made. That's just basically it.
I totally agree
Yeah.
with that point, but I guess the point that I was sort of coming to in my head, that he I feel like there's like multiple prongs to it
Mhm.
all, and he's
Yeah.
sort
Yeah.
of focusing on one really big one. But I think that there's also like the fact that like MFA programs standardize art, or like galleries professionalize behavior, or collectors prefer safer brands and high production values, or biennials reward trends, or social media rewards branding. Like there's all these things in the constellation of the art world right now that want everyone to sort of make the safer bet, or the more production bet, sort of. I don't know where I'm going with that, but
No, no,
but
no.
but what but what I'm trying to say is that I feel like there's a lot of different elements to the art world as it is structurally, that make it so no one is making really, or there's not incentives to make really hard-hitting, intellectual, progressive, moving the envelope forward kind of art.
Hmm.
And it's not just real estate, because you can look at through time, like also looking historically, there have been many instances where real estate was either cheap or expensive, but artists still managed to make innovative or interesting artwork. Like I feel like you make ways of doing it, like you find ways of being clever and working in those constraints. Like there's an article in the New York Times recently, or they do it every so often. It's like living in New York on $50,000 or something, and it sounds crazy, but they interview people who like are very innovative in finding ways of still being creative, still being artists, and living sort of hand to mouth. And I think that it is possible. The thing with being an artist in New York is like the minute you get success, it's like there's an enormous pressure to get more success, to grow more, to expand, to extend. I mean, Josh Kline is an example of that. Like I've known Josh Kline as long as I've known anyone in New York, like 20 plus some odd years. And he also like, was originally like a really scrappy artist painting on dirty old iMacs, and like, but the minute he got more successful, his production became fancier, became bigger, it became expensive, and like he was part of that system, playing into that system. Like he could have been like, no, I'm gonna do it a totally different way. It's the same with the gallery 47 Canal. Like they started off as like a wackadoo open community project space. I was involved with it. I did a performance at that gallery when it
That's so
was
cool.
like a wackadoo thing. But the minute they got successful, it became a corporatized type gallery that then I had no access to anymore, and became a fancy white cube space that did fancy art fairs, and like so they moved from being like this experimental, open, awesome thing into being this like highly corporatized model. And I'm not saying that they're bad or they shouldn't have done it, but like that's what they were sort of pressurized to do, and they did it. And so now that they're looking at the pieces being like, well, what the fuck do I do with it? It's like, well, you were also part and parcel of it.
Yeah, but I mean, so are we saying that if you want to make, I mean, and I think he brings this up in the article that curators will approach about, potentially large installations or an ambitious project like that and sort of leave it up to the artist. Maybe there's a little funding through the museum, but like, is any kind of ambitious project like that on a museum scale, like, is that somehow like, how is that's feeding the beast, like deciding that you want to do something like more expansive and more and appeal to like institutional context? Because I also thought that was interesting. He was saying, curators actually using artists from, say, like Eastern Europe, where real estate is so much cheaper and they can realize these production values much more cheaply than an American artist could in an American studio in New York. I don't know, if we're going to talk about scale, does everything need to be small? I mean, that's does everything, and you can see immediately how that biases itself against sculpture particularly.
Yeah, but does
I don't
everything
know.
also have to be expensive and newly manufactured from new, modern, expensive materials?
Why
Like,
not? I mean, why can't we dream like that? I don't know. Why
we
can't,
then don't
you know,
complain that like that you can't do it anymore because of the constraints of capitalism, because late stage capitalism sucks. It sucks in higher ed. It sucks in everything. Like I mean, even these schools like, Cooper Union, which are huge real estate owners, by the way, they can't even afford to like do business anymore. And so it's like the system that we built in general that can't support itself anymore. And yes, it has something to do with real estate. And I commend Josh, because as long as I've known Josh, he has been like a real like social class warrior. Like he's always talked about social class, real estate, like these constraints on artists. And so this is not like something new he's come to, but it's the sign of our times, though, that someone like him, for all intents and purposes, has been really mega successful. Even he is like, fuck, what am I going to do? Like, I can't afford to be an artist anymore.
not working? Yeah. And I mean, he says he's doing, he's more fortunate than others. And it brings up this issue of like cultural capital versus financial capital. And like, obviously, Josh Kline is someone who has a lot of cultural capital with like, he's highly respected. And I think he even says something in there about like not being able to turn that into living, like, great, have me on all your, give me museum shows, like, have me on panels, respect my intellect. But how am I gonna, how does that translate if the collectors are not there to actually collect the work? Because yeah, it's all going in this one direction. And then it brings up things like shipping costs and things like that also. So I don't know. I mean,
I just think that you have to get scrappy and creative. I mean, you have to look at the sign of the
yeah,
times and be like, these are the constraints that I'm
yeah,
living under.
yeah.
How I obviously can't, like, for instance, I would love to be making big paintings and shipping them to Italy and showing them in amazing galleries. But because of the world and we live in right now, I can't do that. So someone asked me to do a show in Rome in June, and I had to think of, how am I going to do this? And it's not
Yeah,
going to cost anybody anything.
yeah.
So like I've had to be very creative, and like the show I'm doing is like a source materials show where I'm displaying like the images that I use to kind of make my paintings. Like,
Oh,
it's
cool.
like notes on painting kind of thing. And so, I've had to be very creative and different about like how I'm going to still do a show, present my work, but do it given the fact that no one can afford to ship paintings anymore, and that's not realistic for me. And so, that would also be like my argument to Josh in a way. Is like, you know what? Maybe right now you can't make giant artwork that costs $500,000 to make. Maybe you can in 10 years. I don't know. But like right now,
Don't
you
know.
can't. So figure it out. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't rage against the machine from your glass pulpit. Like, like you
Yeah,
gotta you gotta take two sticks together and whittle them and make a little fire. And
let's
I
just
feel like
keep
that's
making lemonade out of I mean, but I think what he's saying is it's going one direction for people who make work like him, and only in one direction, and that he
yes.
doesn't
But
see it getting better,
I'm also
and so
very sick and tired
yeah.
of video and sculpture type of people thinking that painters are making money hand over fist and have no problems, because I've never really been financially solvent in my art. Like, I have to piece together my living from so many different things, and sometimes I have a show, sometimes I sell, but like, I've
Mhm.
never made really any big bucks off my artwork. And yet I've had so many friends who are sculptors or video artists or performance artists who are like, "Oh, you're a painter. You're fine.
Mhm.
You have it easy." And I'm like, "No, we all have it hard.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
whether you're, you know,
Well, and the flip side would be that painters rarely get the opportunity to have like a solo show at, Mocha or the Whitney, like the way that you would like institutionally. I feel
literally."
in general they don't support, because maybe they feel that at a certain level you are making money, so there is that pushback too to that for sure.
But
But
to leverage oneself, like, I own a house, and a studio space, but to do that, I had to teach 15 classes a year as an adjunct. I had to work part-time in an architecture office.
mhm,
I had to, start like side gigs doing like commission drawings. Like, I had like 25 different jobs
yeah,
in order to, like, buy a house and buy a studio, and like,
yeah,
by God, I did it.
yeah,
And I'm still sort of piecing it all together from a million different things, but like, you just have to really be scrappy
yeah.
to do it. And it's not like no one owes you anything. That's sort of the sad reality of like late
Yeah, and
stage
I didn't
capitalism.
I mean, I kind of took his argument in the sense that he was making it for younger artists even. He was saying like, "How do young artists do this in New York now? Like, this is, like, insane," you know? But, yeah, you have to scrape things together. Like, I taught full-time art until I was 40, like, we're a lot of us are, and I think he talks about that too, like Rick Ritt's piece where there was like now I'm forgetting it. I should have read the article right before, but like you could call Rick. He was art handling across the street at the gallery, and then he had a cell phone in his show, and you could call and talk to him as he was art handling. And Josh Kline was like, "Can you imagine like anyone doing a piece like that where you acknowledged all of the labor that you're putting in to make this happen, like, and then that got back to the whole idea of artists who have money versus artists who don't have money, um, yeah. So that, yeah, I saw someone this week, fairly big artist, get a public commission who I know comes from money, like that kind of thing where you're just like your whole career, you're just thinking like, those people I always had to put on another playing field. Like, I'm not even competing with those people because I can't, when you're working multiple jobs or you're working full time and you're trying to make work and you're like, well, I'm just going to leave them out of my purview because, like, I can't.
Well, you can't compete with them. Like, you can't think in your head like, "Oh, I got to compete with that person," because
No, it's
there's
like a different playing field, So, anyway, maybe this is just turning into a bitch sesh or something, but like, I
I
think,
mean, but the thing is, I also get like Josh Kline's feeling of like, I've worked really hard. I've done it all. Why can't I make a living? Why can't I fucking make a living? Right? It's like Francis Stark's breakdown on social media was the same way. It's like, I'm famous. Like, why, why am I suffering?
why don't we have any like infrastructure for this or any kind of way to catch artists at this point? But it's just getting worse. And I think you had mentioned like because you teach and you've put together different teaching jobs over the years. It's like massive layoffs. Like I was just talking to a student. He came into town. He got a travel grant from SAIC to go see New York. And I took him around some galleries, and he's like, SAIC's School of the Art Institute of Chicago is suffering because of international students because Trump cut the visas in the big, beautiful bill.
Yeah.
So that lack of international students coming to our colleges and universities to pay full rides is affecting the entire program for American students. So it's like, this is not going anywhere. All of these trends are not getting better. They're just getting worse in terms of more restriction, more like, you know, even the fact that we both work, you work as much as you do. I work full time for a long time. I might have to go back at some point. You know, that's American art. That's just, and we all just take it for granted. Like, this is the way it is. But like, is it right? Is it right that we should all just be like, well, we'll just make, you know, lemonade out of lemons and make this work, you know? And
I mean, I feel like there's no choice because I can't change the system personally. Like I have to live within it.
yeah,
And so I find that I have to just be as scrappy and as resourceful and advocate for myself as strongly as I can
yeah, of
within the sort of system that I found, because
course. I mean,
it's so
what else
precarious. I
can
mean,
we
the
do?
new school is laying off 15% of its faculty. I got my MFA from Parsons at the new school. Like that might not exist anymore. And
I
that's
know SAIC is where I
terrible.
got my master's. I
Yeah.
know, and it's that is a very easy remedy though. That was people. Okay, now I'm going to go off because I haven't had enough sleep and I don't want to ever turn our podcast into a political podcast because
Go.
it would never end, but this is the weekend of no kings. If Trump hadn't gotten into power for the second time, you know, we would not have these like ridiculous restrictions on international visas, which is just like
Yeah, but
pure.
Gina, we also can't like rely on international students to prop up our education system. Like
Well, that's
that
another
also isn't
issue.
isn't really a sustainable. I know that that's what all these schools were doing, but like I don't think that that's realistically like,
But
sustainable
but
practice.
international students going to American institutions is as old as, I mean, what? How long has that been happening? I
Sure,
mean,
but
that
that
is,
hasn't always been how schools supported themselves.
well, I mean, that's a whole other conversation about, you know, taxes and
Yes. The
nobody
tax
wanting
structure has
to
allowed.
not wanting to pay taxes and all of our other American faults 100%. But I'm just saying
Yes.
in the short term or whatever this will turn into, the fact that both of our alma maters are suffering within a very short window of time was completely avoidable. That's all I'm saying. And I'll just leave it there. Like,
Well, it's just the enshittification of everything, higher ed. Like I went to Hampshire College at first, like as a freshman, and that
yeah,
school has been sort of almost going in and out of business for like
yeah,
25 years.
yeah,
And because, there was a time where there was a lot of support for higher ed. There was a lot of ability to borrow money for higher ed. There was a lot of government subsidy of higher ed. And that was like the golden age of higher education, where you could be a full professor making a pretty good salary with tenure, and like everything else, Walmart and like the art world and everything, it all gets consolidated into the bigger the better and the smaller the weirder, and like the middle just totally gets hollowed out. And it's like that's happening with everything. Like everything is like just being sort of hollowed out because the support, the sort of general support for like the middle is just kind of evaporating. It's the same in the art world. Like the collectors, you used to be able to sell artwork to people who are like doctors or lawyers or, taxi cab owners. But people who are like that, like sort of middle to upper middle class people, they can't afford to buy any of our art anymore. Like our paintings are like,
hmm
10, 20, $30,000. Like that's like a car. Like who. And so we've sort of, and that's happened with a lot of things. So like, that's what I said. Like we're also kind of part and parcel of the enshittification of it too. Like, yes, I want a lot of money for my artwork because I worked really hard on it and I think it's great. But like, is it in theory really worth tens of thousands of dollars? I don't know. Like that's a really good question, I think, to ask. but we're stuck in
Yeah, I
in in the
mean,
sort of mire of that.
why shouldn't art be the same price as a car? I mean, I think that like this is all just comes into like where art fits so awkwardly into the like into American culture because we
Yeah.
think of things in such like specific terms of value and then art comes along and says and yeah, so much of it is arbitrary and fame. We're just talking about Van Gogh and like how much of that is because of his freaking ear and fame and like the value. But like, yeah, it should be, we should value artists. This is what I believe. I think art
Right, but I
should be
feel like so
valuable. And
many
it's like,
collectors, the newer class of collectors are really like speculators, and they treat
yeah,
the art
yeah,
market like
like a
stocks or something, whereas
right.
more previous heretofore, they were
Yeah.
collectors who were really invested in
Yes.
ideas and practices, and
I
and
mean, I
and
was,
they've died off because higher ed doesn't teach the classics, and we don't teach like liberal arts anymore, art
yeah,
appreciation,
yeah,
and like that kind of.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, 100%. I think like the wealthier you get, the less, actual time you have to actually absorb what might be interesting or talk about, just talking about culture or whatever might be not fitting as neatly into, what these, yeah, I think, yeah, it's not.
Well, that was why I started that my business, because there there was a period where I lost like a couple of adjunct jobs because of schools cutting
Mhm,
things, and I needed to like make some more money. I needed to sort of make some more money in another way, and I was like, well, why don't I make a portion of my practice like really accessible
mhm.
to anybody, to everybody? And what's more accessible than like a white t-shirt? I mean, you're wearing one right now. And so it was sort of a genius move on my part, because it made me able to make some money off
Mm,
my artwork, but that was also very egalitarian and for everyone, but was also different than my more like fine art practice.
mhm.
So I
Yeah.
was making drawings of like Sinead O'Connor, Frank O'Hara, The Cure, Kate Bush, Tracy Chapman, like, Oscar Wilde. Like I don't necessarily put them in my paintings per se. So it was like, I felt like, and that to me felt good, because I was opening up my practice in a realistic way, that like it's not just for fancy rich people and high-end luxury goods, but there also can be an element that's for smart and culture people, but that's actually totally affordable.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's really
Not that I
great.
made a
Well,
lot of money off the t-shirt business, because believe me, there's not a lot of people
there's not
clamoring for a Proust t.
I love it. Well,
Yeah.
this kind of maybe to transition to like some shows that we've seen, which actually, I really, not to bring up like money in exchange, but we were just talking about like, speculators and art collectors using art as like a speculative business. It's like an unregulated stock market, right? The art market. So it appeals to a lot of this kind of activity. And I saw this show, which is Wendy Red Star at Sergeant's Daughters. Isn't that what it is? Sergeant's Daughter? Yeah. I definitely recommend that show. So she has these really beautiful glass beads just laid out on blankets. And they're the trading company. Oh my God, I'm forgetting the name now, but the really famous trading company, the Hudson. Oh my God. Anyway, but she has these beautiful glass
East
beads,
India Trading Company.
not the East India, but the Hudson Bay or it's like yeah, she has them on these blankets, which is just such a beautiful way to display her work. You're thinking about like the anti-pedestal, but also this very like, evocative Native American trading kind of space. And she recreated these beads, and then you can get this free like thing in the gallery. Oh my God, my vocabulary is really limited today.
Like a piece of
Um,
paper or like a flyer.
it's like a kind of like a broadsheet that has the value or the history of the value of each particular bead and its patterns and how these work their way around the world as a certain type of currency and why, and how different ports added value and different going through certain ports would add value. Anyway, it was like super interesting, and actually saw that she was profiled in the New Yorker going down a canal street and picking out a knockoff bag and talking about that value of exchange and knockoffs. And anyway, I just think it's like very pertinent, but also like beautiful, beautiful objects and like historically really interesting. So I recommend
Yeah, so
that
I'd
show.
like
And
to know
it really,
how the hell she's affording her rent by, selling like beads and stones, like, so
well,
that's an interesting question.
these are beautiful, oversized, almost like a, I don't know, 12-inch, like large
Yeah, but
glass
somebody has to
blown.
make money somewhere. How's the
Oh,
gallery keeping the lights on? So are these things actually for sale?
yeah, I think those are, and there's a lot of paper paintings on the wall as well. So yeah,
Right. So
but
there are
I
like
think
other
that
sort of
economy of, oh, I'm sorry, I think you're freezing. Oh no. But that economy of display, no pedestals, nothing, it was paintings on paper of the beads and then the actual large glass beads um, on the blankets. It had a certain kind of scrappiness to the installation. And they're really beautiful objects, but then they also have this really interesting history. I don't know. I just like loved it. I thought it was so good. So, and I guess I also, as somebody who works between, as a three-dimensional painter or sculptor, sometimes people don't consider my work painting. Like I get so much out of these shows and these works that are not painting, like we need all of the disciplines to feed each
Yeah.
other.
One of my
I mean,
favorite shows I saw was the Felix Baudry show at Situations,
oh
which
yeah.
was all like these like knit heads and these weird couches that were bodies, and you could sit on the couch. And I went in there, and like Michael Mahalchik was happened to be there, and we sat on the couch for like an hour and just talked. And I'm like, this is so cool that we're like just sitting in this gallery, hanging out, having a talk about like art and life amongst these weird objects. And the show is totally somewhere between, totally like sellable kind of work, but also totally unsellable type of work. And I love that because it sort of vacillates between art really for its own weirdo self, but it also still has like a commercial and a viable sort of value as an object that you can own and have. And so there was just something about that seemed real. And even Mahalchik was like, don't you feel like this is really refreshing? And we were like, yeah, this is like, there's something really refreshing about it. Whereas when I went to the Michael Heiser show after that, I was like, this feels like expensive, late stage capitalist kind of art that no one can afford but a billionaire. And it's like, to me, like classic, like white male patriarchy kind of artwork. And I was just like, this feels bad to me after like the Felix Baudry show.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's interesting that like sellable works alongside more experimental works. I was having this thought about artists making these smaller versions of their work, like works on paper. I think we had talked about the Nicholas Party show, like these artists
Or the Sasha
whose,
Broning show at Magenta Plains. The big paintings are
oh yeah,
downstairs, and the small kind of like
yeah,
gouaches or
right.
like little oil paintings are upstairs. Then there's smaller versions of the larger ones downstairs.
Yeah, so and those I think come first, but like what I'm seeing are these ones that are done after, which I think like Jasper Johns might have done as well, but like that as sort of a commercial concern because like I feel like there was a time, and maybe I'm just making this up in my head, where artists would sort of explode at auction and the prices would go way up, and then there would be a sort of certain space for them to experiment in video, like to take a break from making paintings, right? So that they could like limit their supply, but like maybe they made a video, maybe they did an installation. But now it's sort of like we still want to capitalize on that fervor for your work. We just need them at lower price points. So then they have artists back in the galleries making like smaller versions of Am I crazy? Am I just making this up? I don't know, but I feel like it's and not to bring it back to you know what, but it's like the gallery is still trying, is always trying to get that overhead, right? So they're not going to let you just like go off and make a film. Like you need to like you got to get back in there and give us something, like even if
Yeah.
it's, you know. So
Well,
anyway,
I don't
sorry to
like. I mean, I love this Sasha Browning show because I think that the
yeah,
paintings are like really bizarre. They're and they're totally disorienting and surreal. But I actually kind of like the smaller versions better. I think because
okay.
they
Yeah.
took me more into the work, and it made me think that like sometimes like I think of like Elizabeth Peyton, and something I've always loved about her work is that she has always kept it small. She has always resisted getting huge and scaling up, I've really had like a respect for that kind of artist who's like, even I could be so unbelievably famous and like and sought after, but I'm still gonna make these small paintings.
Yeah, yeah.
And
No,
you know
that's yeah, that's a cool way to yeah. No, I love that Sasha Browning show. And if you sit like in the front of the gallery where they have all of her older books and you just
yeah.
see like the breadth and the length of her process and how she's moved through different bodies of work and all of her maquettes, like she makes maquettes to actually paint from. They're actually in the books and yeah, she's like
Yeah, her process is definitely like unimpeachable. I mean, she's like,
yeah,
artist
yeah,
through and through. And
yeah,
I give like I was so excited to see that show. And Magenta Plains shows some interesting
yeah.
paintings. Like I always love the Chase and Matham's work that they've shown, and there was also work of his downstairs there that I
Mm,
thought was really cool. And
yeah,
but what's interesting too is I noticed in Tribeca a bunch of like photography that I hadn't seen in a while, like Latha Wilson at Grimm and Mariah Robertson at Chart. Like those were big
yeah,
names, like, back in the new photography era. And so I'm glad to see that they are still indeed like working and making ambitious projects and playing with materiality and doing some weird stuff. Like both of those shows are doing weird stuff. Like Latha Wilson has like a work of art that's embedded in the wall and wrapped around a column, which is like
real cool.
totally, if you see a picture of it, it's like a
Yeah,
total trompe l'oeil. But when you see it in person, it's like has a materiality that's very visceral. And
yeah.
Mariah Robertson has been experimenting with like painting and photography and doing these really enlarged pieces that are totally like strange in their A, materiality, B, their sort of approach to like photo processes, and C, like just the intricacy and the layering of the image. So like that, it's great to see photography because that's also often like not a big market hero. Sort of coming into play in the
Yeah,
city.
totally. That's I love them both. I love both of their works. I saw a really great group show at Tara Downs. Do you know her space? It's like right off Canal and I
I do
love
know that
Tara.
I've not been, so tell what is it? Tell me about
Yeah.
it.
So it's called Rare Aesthetics, which is kind of a term like an online social media term. There's you can read about the whole background of the what that means because I'm gonna garble it, but it has sort of artists from the '80s, different generations. It has Julia Wachtel, Nancy Dwyer, like different
Oh,
people, but
yes,
then
yes.
yes, so it's really great, and there are a couple. Madeline Ray Hines and also Maria Steiger, whose work I thought was really interesting, like pushing painting. I mean, Madeline Ray Hines does the bottom of high heels, so they're very abstract. You just see the rubbed away. Anyway, I think her work is really interesting. And then Maria Steiger is doing these very tightly stretched, almost photoreal, but they're shaped canvases that then have elements that are magnetized to each other. Anyway, you have to go
Mm.
on to Tear Down's site and like look at these. He's doing a big installation at Unlimited, but I thought that was a great show. The Nancy Dwyer is this amazing like text piece that unfurls that says "lazy girl," like a lazy boy, but like it's just cool. And I love Tara, like one of the true like sweetheart, like brilliant people in the art world downtown. Yeah,
Julia Wachtel is like a mythological goddess to me because I followed her work for years. It's very inspiring to me because I think about it almost on a daily basis. And she, like, I feel like her career has been so interesting because she, sort of big in the 80s, sort of fell away for like 20 years, but was still kind of just showing and working a little bit. But then came back, like Elizabeth D started showing her again. But then Elizabeth D closed. Then she showed with Hannah Ann Rather.
Mm.
I can't remember the name of that
Helen.
gallery. Helen Ann Rather, but then Helen Ann Rather closed, and like so, Julia Wachtel's had like a career where she's shown with a bunch of galleries that have like been big supporters of her, but then have closed. But she keeps coming back, like it's like you can't keep a good girl down kind of thing, and I love that, like that.
Mhm.
And that, like, I've shown with a bunch of galleries that have closed, and
Mhm.
when
Me
I
too.
felt like I was like on the top of my game, and it can really feel like the wind is sucked right out of your sail, and many artists totally disappear when
Mhm.
that happens, and you really have to have a deep resilience to keep
Mhm.
going and keep pushing and keep making work. And she is an example of someone who is like just keeps making better, more interesting work, and finding opportunities. And I love that. That's what keeps me going, is
Yeah.
thinking, remembering sort of artists like that who are really in it, and you can't keep them down,
Yeah, 100%. I was gonna say that my gallery in my first gallery closed right after I did a solo booth with them at Freeze, which was like, even though I sold, a significant portion of that work, there were collectors like trying to send the work back after they had paid because once they heard the gallery was closing, they were like, she's screwed, like, forget about her. So it's pretty devastating in, like, the context, especially if it's right after you had a show or right after you feel like,
definitely.
oh, you're just, like, hung out to dry, like,
That happened with me when I was showing with Fitzroy Gallery in
you
the
know
Lower East Side. Like, I had a solo show with them that was the most successful show I had ever had. Like, it got an
Mhm,
art forum review, it got
mhm,
tons of other press and reviews. Pretty much almost sold out the entire show. I had commission, like not like a waiting list, but people commissioned me to like make like new paintings, like the ones that had sold. I was like feeling like, oh, my art career is finally like really hitting a stride. And then the gallery closed, and it was like someone just turned the tap off on that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I tried to sort of transition to like another gallery, and I had a studio visit with a gallery that was really good at the time and was like, oh, we love your work, and we would maybe like to work with you, but then they closed.
oh, yeah,
And
yeah,
like that was an era where a lot of
yeah,
galleries were closing,
yeah,
and it was just like I've had to like keep going, keep picking up the pieces, keep trying opportunities, keep
yeah,
showing,
yeah,
without letting that destroy
yeah,
me.
yeah. We all
Oh
have
yeah.
to. I know, yeah, we definitely is, like, part of the and I think we were briefly talking about that, like, people being like, "How do I get a gallery? How do I get a gallery?" It's like sometimes I mean, I think all the time you have to already be selling work almost to like get a gallery, which is really counterintuitive. It almost sounds like, that like insurance thing where you pay your insurance and then the minute you have any kind of disaster and you need to cash in on it, then they jack your rates up. It's like,
If they
but
drop
why
your
was I but it's like, isn't that your job? Like, yeah, but you have to actually come in on a tide of, already selling your work in order to
either
get a gallery.
or
Because
I
I think
or either you're
sometimes people,
totally unknown, and someone feels like they can create a whole new market for you, like a whole like
yeah, I think so, but I think that's rare. I think like that's
that's
rare for
rare.
somebody to really, yeah, for somebody to really envision something and to take a chance. It depends on like where the art market is at the time and like but somebody to take a chance, a pure chance with no like, I don't know, which I think is just discouraging for artists because it's like, you do have to like have this certain momentum. But you can do that from showing with a bunch of people, having group show, like getting a certain kind of buzziness out there about your work. And then, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
well, often the buzziness comes from because you're actually making work that happens to be trendy. Like, and
know.
so there's a buzz around that. And so that, like, people think that the gallery makes the trend or the gallery makes the buzz, but usually the gallery is picking up on someone who's
Mhm.
already
Right.
in the zeitgeist in some
Right,
capacity.
right, and that's why you see the bigger galleries pulling from mid-size or emerging where the buzz is already created, and they're just like, "Well,
Yeah.
we'll step in here, you know, we'll just take" yeah,
I
so
remember a gallerist once told me, she was a very astute gallerist, and she said, I will only do a studio visit with an artist after I've heard their name at least 3 times.
interesting.
Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
interesting. And
yeah,
like, it sounds a little harsh, but what I think she was saying is that like if the artist's name is on people's
right,
tongues, then
right,
that means that there's a market, like I can sell it, like, or like
mhm,
that some people are going to support it.
right,
Because that
exactly.
gallerist knows that they can't make that out of nothing.
Yeah, and I would just back to the conversation about overhead, the more pressure there is on them, the more likely like how that scenario ramps up, and the less likely they are to take chances because they have to stack the cash in order to yeah, I don't know. It's
But it is interesting because I get asked that question from students too. Is like, how would
yeah.
I get represented by a gallery? And I'm like, listen, buddy, I'm not even represented by a gallery. How the hell
Yeah.
should I know? Like, to
Yeah.
me, it's like also like, people who are single are like, well, how do I meet someone? How do I get a husband or whatever? It's like, I don't know. It's like for everyone, it's different. Like for
Yeah,
everyone,
yeah.
it's like a different journey. A lot of
Mhm.
it's luck. A lot of it's like, oh, because your gallery never closed, is that
Mhm.
the reason that you still are with a
Mhm.
gallery? Like you just got lucky.
Mhm.
There's so many variables. That's what annoys me about those like people who are, advertise like, I can help you get represented by a gallery. I'm like, bullshit, you can.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. But, any other shows? The other one I really wanted well, I don't know, but I really loved Claudia Bertrand's show. I know you saw that too. It closed, sorry, I didn't mean to make it sound like closed, like the gallery closed, but it just closed yesterday, the show. And it was like her absolute, like thorough investigation of Titanic, the movie, by like reshooting it and all these really casual. I would put it in the category of oh my god, another am I losing my mind or am I just like hungover? But
Of
the artist of
obsessive pet projects.
yeah, like the artist who does oh my god, he was really big like 15 years ago, recently had a show with all the cardboard and brown paper and brown packing tape and these like immersive
Yeah.
installation.
Oh, what's his name? It's a guy. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
I
Yeah,
think
someone will have to
he's
write it.
German or
Yeah,
European. I'll put it in
yeah,
the stories just like I did with Ragnar
yeah,
Knudsen,
yeah.
but that kind of thorough investigation of something at every level, from drawing to sculpture to actually refilming it and then having it in different language, she has in Spanish and just that
Very
distance.
postmodern.
Yeah, it's like that distance from this extremely famous, here we come full circle from Van Gogh to like Titanic, like the movie, and how to access this thing and how it plays out in all these different ways. And I just love that kind of obsessive
It
investigation.
reminded me, that show is like the best of like where you
Uh-huh.
get to like investigate something, so deeply with no worry about like the market or
Mhm.
if it's sellable or like, and that was what was
Mhm.
refreshing about it actually,
Yeah.
is that it
Yeah.
felt like she did this project that took up like 10 years, but to what end really, other than just being obsessive and having to do it, having this like
Yeah.
manic energy to do it.
Yeah.
And so that to me is sort of a refreshing
But then
approach.
in the end, sort of embodying this distance between, we are these very abstract people. I mean, some of us more than others in terms of pop culture and how much we identify with it or how much we identify with fame and these, and how when you actually see it all broken down like that, you realize like what is real, what is not real, what do I have access to, what am I literally living, is my idea of romance from this stupid movie, is my idea of class from Rose dancing the jig in the basement with all the Irish fiddlers like below deck, like, and then she had moments
When
of
they open the trunk and there's Cezannes in the trunk,
yeah,
like
I mean, it kind of has everything. So it is this kind of amazing. She has this one painting of like the hand in the steam, which is when
oh, the
Rose,
steam.
when they're
I
having
saw that.
sex with a final, like, in the car. I think right before everything starts to hit the fan, they're
Yeah.
in the car and her hand goes up in the steam, like, so there was like humor. I don't know. I just
Well, and
I
also
think it's
Titanic
really
is a
valuable.
sign of the times that we live in too. Like,
Yes, exactly.
like the idea of like the too big to fail, but it sinks on
Ugh.
its maiden voyage is like the most incredible metaphor of all
For
time.
the United States, like, for our
Yeah.
whole country and how we could take out like, we could end life on this planet as we know it in any moment because Donald Trump is, like, pissed about something.
And yet Jasper Johns is still alive and still painting.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah.
that,
No,
that brings
exactly.
me to the fact that I still have not seen that show at Gagosian. I
God, what are we
absolutely need
doing?
to.
How long is it up? Yeah, we have to go
I
see
think it's
it. Well,
up
let's do
for
it
another couple of weeks.
okay.
But Gina and
Maybe
I, we're going to go to the biennial this week, and so we can
mhm.
do a special
So we can
episode
finally
on
talk about it. Yeah.
and finally like just pick it apart and discuss it in great detail. So keep an
Yeah,
eye
and
out
all
for
of the
our
criticism.
biennial.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and parsing all the critics who love to talk about it, and there's it's worth discussing. So, all right, well,
Yeah.
finally, hopefully
Yeah.
the weather will be nice. Everyone in New York will be out. People will be like shirtless and pantless, throwing down.
Yes. Take it off.
Yeah.
Sorry. You broke up right as I said that, so it got really
Okay.
quiet, but
Well, I live, in the country, the internet's terrible, so it's practically like living
oh,
in Turkmenistan. Anyway, all right. So signing off.
okay.
See you
Bye,
later. Great
friends.
combo.
You have a good week. Okay, bye.